Welcome to Dialogue. The Chinese Central Rural Work Conference has wrapped up, and it mapped out plans for agriculture development in 2021 and beyond. So what is the most important thing for rural development, and why is China highlighting the urgency of resolving the problems of seas and cultivated land? To find out, I'm joined by Wang Dan, Chief Economist of Hang Seng Bank China, Michele Geraci, a former Undersecretary of State of the Italian Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, and Isabel Hilton, CEO of China Dialogue. That's our topic. I'm Zhou Yue. Let me start with you, Wang Dan. The annual Central Rural Work Conference, it is aimed at ensuring a strategic consistency as well as policy coordination for agriculture. But what do you think is the strategic priorities for Chinese agricultural work?
I think there are three priorities, and the number one is actually to boost the income for farmers. And that would involve diversifying the income sources, not just from agriculture, but also from off-farm work. And then the second one is the technology enhancement, and that including the seed technology, but also it will include to introduce modern management skills. And last but not least, I think one priority would be to develop agricultural services, and that includes services to provide feed, planting, or even harvesting.
Michele, what do you think the Chinese government's plan of putting such a stress on agricultural work and people in the countryside?
I think in addition to what we just heard, it is part of an overall strategy that falls within the dual circulation idea to make China less and less reliant on external supplies, on many of what are now becoming more and more strategic industries. It is the same for technology, semiconductor, and of course food, which I see as the two pillars that could give really China not the independence, because we don't want to move to an autarky world, but a reliance more on both domestic demand on one side and domestic production on the other one. So it's almost like a dual circulation squared. It's not just about demand coming from domestic, but it's also the supply mostly coming from domestic. And of course, food security is key. And I think it also shows how China is moving into incremental steps after solving the poverty in the rural areas just this year. Now it's moving into upgrading the livelihood of people and bringing them from like just above the poverty threshold to a more sustainable standard of living, and then more and more productivity issue. Because we also have a problem of migration from rural to urban areas, and we know this is driven by the income differential.
Yeah.
And at some point, the cities may be saturated. So instead of making farmer turn into poor urban citizen, it is best to give farmer the opportunity to make money by staying in rural areas or in the rural activities. And I think this is a very interesting and hopefully successful strategy.
And I want to pick up what you said about the supply chain stability. Obviously, COVID has exposed a lot of countries to fluctuations and supply chain stability problems, even in food system. So, Michele, do you think China should worry about its food security and because of the global supply chain fracturing?
No, I don't think so, because China also has stocks of grains that would buffer any potential disruption. I think we are a little bit over the problem of supply chain management that were very heavy in February and March last year. Even we in Italy could not get component parts from China, from Vietnam for our own manufacturing sectors. I think the world is adjusting to this. You know, there may be decoupling or not, but I think the necessary goods will continue to flow. And China, I know the land is not infinite, but it has enough to give, of course, food. So I see no worry of food shortages in China, because China also has a nice mix of evolution from pure grains into meat, pork, and so on. So, and with let's not forget, China has a war chest in financial with almost around 3 trillion US dollar foreign reserves that can be used to do additional purchases. But again, the supply that is becoming a little bit more liquid now, plus the stock of food, I think poses no threat. Still, I think planning for the future to have a supply and demand independence largely from foreigner, it will be easier. So that, for example, we will continue China to import rice from Thailand, which is the biggest producer, but it would be nice to also make sure that that is not completely reliant. Should anything, hopefully not, happen in the Southeast Asian countries.
But Wangdan, obviously, in the time of COVID, a lot of countries are averse to risks. One risk that China is exposed to is importing a lot of high-quality seeds from elsewhere. But what do you make of this problem? How big is it, and is China's plan appropriate?
Well, this is a mix because, of course, this is not what Brazil and the United States would like to hear because they produce and export soybeans into China. So China, for example, the soybeans is an industry where China needs it and does not make them. So it needs to buy them, it needs to import them. So this is good news for China, but I think we also need to be careful not to upset the international balances too much. And that's why I think China can strike a balance, continue to purchase from the United States to keep our American friends happy, to buy from Brazil to keep our Brazilian friends happy, because we do not want to disrupt, especially Latin American economies that rely a lot on export of commodities, such as Chile for copper and so on, Australia as well. But at the same time, plan for a more indigenous production so that the disruption is not immediate, and it gives time to the producer in the United States, to producer in Brazil, so either evolve into other cultures or to find alternative markets. And I just throw an idea, and this is where China comes into the equation, because the model of rural development that China has done so successful in its own market could be duplicated with the due differences in Africa. And given, of course, the size of the market, 1 billion people, where the agriculture needs exactly what we heard, improvement in machinery, agricultural machinery and services, is where those two countries, I give the example, United States and Brazil, could find alternative market with the help of China. So China does not go against by taking supply away from them, by helping them develop alternative markets. And this, I think, it would be win for both China, that satisfy the need to make things that they need, satisfy the producers in the Americas that do not lose customers. In fact, China helps them develop new markets into Africa.
Wangdan, this question is supposed to have you weigh in on this. I want your take.
For the independent,
well, China's seed dependency on foreign companies is high, but not excessive. So when we look at the main staple foods in China, that is rice and wheat, China uses domestic seeds, period. But when it comes to those high value added crop food, or vegetables, or even corn, the increasing demand and dependency on foreign companies is increasing very fast. So that is the concern for China. But I don't think it is at the point that China needs to be worried about to be cut out of the global seed supply. Because the thing is, China is against genetically modified organisms, and a lot of the seeds in the global market are GMOs. So China still sort of half closed the door for this kind of import and this kind of production. So overall, I just don't see that seed security or even food security is really a concern yet.
But will it change, or will Chinese policymakers change on GMO food? Because obviously there are a huge demand there, and also there are political thinking probably behind this. On that?
Right. I think the central government is slowly changing its attitude toward commercialization of the GM technology. And one main oppositing power is from the general public, actually.
Yeah.
If you ask anyone in China, it doesn't matter whether they're highly educated or not so highly educated, they will give you similar answers. People do not want to eat GMOs.
Or at least there was a high
But
chance
now
they would say
we're
no.
at this point. Yes, but you know, there's no scientific proof that GMOs are harmful to people's health or even long-term health. There are some environmental concerns when you plant GMO crops, but you know, when we do not have the scientific evidence to go against the GMOs, this is just really the public fear for nothing. I think in the next 5 years, actually GMO development, which is the most important seed technology, it will be prioritized. It just has to be slow.
Because that will basically dictates where Chinese agriculture will go. Will Chinese agriculture still depend on manpower or people, land resources, or more on technology? And that is a strategic choice. Will China go higher on the value chain by acquiring more technologies, by being more independently developing their agriculture added value? Want that?
Yes, China will have to go down that road, and it has to be more open about adopting different kinds of technology, not just in seed, but also in terms of agricultural breeding. So China now also rely on foreign countries like Australia, New Zealand, Denmark for its breeding cattle or breeding pigs. So this is not some problem that can be resolved in a short period of time. It can. Of course, Chinese government can put a lot of resources to develop the native technologies, but during this process, it needs collaboration from other countries in all kinds of technology. So it's just not a process that can be rushed.
Michaela, countries in Europe, especially in the European Union, probably also have their own framework, some say well-developed framework in agriculture development. What are the unique experiences that you can teach the Chinese?
You know, because we have in a way a natural hedge by being part of the European common market with 27 countries, and sometimes the differences in economic structures of those 27 states are a little bit of a burden, because we need the common policies, and we try to make everyone happy, and we make everyone unhappy. But it also offers a natural hedge. So countries that are more heavily manufacturing can then don't need to worry too much about their own agricultural supply, because they can acquire it freely, no barriers, no quotas from other countries in Central Europe. Plus, we also have a relatively good relationship with our Ukrainian friend, which is also a big producer of agricultural product. We have a PAC, the Common Agricultural Policy in Europe, to subsidize farmers, to make sure that they do not suffer from competition from other parts of the world, the developing countries, where the cost of labor and cost of products, maybe especially food product, can be cheaper. So in Europe, I think we have kind of got it right this time to strike the balance between, and of course the agriculture is modernized. We have not the issue of hukou and land rights and use ownership and usage issue that we still have in China. So like in the US, we have now large farms that give those economies of scale that allow large purchases and therefore lower prices. So I think in Europe, on the agriculture, we're doing very well, to the point that maybe the other sectors of the economy complain that governments do help too much farmers.
Do you think China share more with Europe in terms of agriculture development, or America? Because the Chinese don't have many arable land as the Americans do, but we do have a common market like the Europeans share.
In a way, yes, you have a common market of the provinces, and in fact, that's exactly what China does. You know, if you make rice in Hunan, of course, that rice is not just for people in Changsha, but it's available to the whole community. So in that way, China has this natural hedge. The problem is that when you have a concentration of agriculture in one region, then you have to worry about the migration, inter-region migration from agricultural-driven economies to maybe the eastern cities. Because, of course, in an economy that grows at 5.5% on average for the next 5 years, the individual need to try to capture as much as gain possible in the short term may not be entirely aligned with the interest of the country. So the country challenge is to manage the geographic diversity and the needs of individuals to keep them happy. That's why I'm very much in favor. Just a few years ago, Premier Li Keqiang launched the idea of urbanization around people, meaning instead of having people moving to the city, we have the city moving to the rural areas by building urban centers in the rural areas so that people can stay closer to the families, they can continue maybe to have their own land, and they can do maybe part-time jobs in shops, restaurants that give incremental income. I think the challenge for China and the difference between the US and Europe is the rights of use or the rights of trade of land, because and this is very difficult. And if you remember, we did a documentary. I personally did a documentary in the rural areas of China talking to farmers. And the dilemma here is if they're allowed to sell their own land, yes, they can capitalize it, but probably they do not put this immediate flow of fund to good use. Maybe they waste it. Maybe they've never seen tens of thousands of renminbi in one go. So there is also a social responsibility the government takes by paradoxically not allowing them to sell so they don't lose their only asset, which gives them a sense of safety. And that is good for consumption, because propensity to consumption also grows when people know that they have a place to go back, even if it's 2 mu of land, maybe making rice at 2 renminbi per pound, not a lot, a couple of thousand renminbi per year, but it gives the farmer a sense of safety that allow them to take risk by maybe entering ventures and moving to the city to try to find the better opportunities. But if he fails, he has a place to go back. And that's why I myself struggle with the view that maybe land reforms should also go faster, but not faster.
It is indeed a dilemma. Thank you very much, Michela. Wang Dan, your take on this difficult trade-off. On one hand, probably land reform will give farmers more money to spend. On the other, it probably have a drag on how to develop sustained and modernized agriculture.
Land reform is quite necessary. The main thing in the land reform to me, though, is the land security. So now China has almost finished its reform to give the land certificate to farmers. And we know that once the land security is increased, the labor specialization will also be enhanced. And that means if a farmer is more suited in farming, they might as well stay in agriculture. But if they don't, they can rent out the land and go to city
and take
other jobs.
Who is suitable and what is the secure state? Is the market?
There are different types of farmers. Some are more skilled. It's not necessarily the market. I think it's more of a tradition, because I did my fair share of the rural survey when I did my postdoc. So it looks as if the farmers, they self-select. So when they grow up in villages, some of them are genuinely interested in agriculture. There are very talented pig farmers, there are very avid corn farmers, so they have a different approach to agriculture, they care. But for others, they might be more interested in a city job and interested in moving away from the village life. So those people, they live a different life. I think that's more a personal choice.
And there is also a new development, that is China has decided to rely not only on foreign demand, but also domestic demand, what we call dual circulation. And that has a lot to do of how the farmers are doing, how the people living in the countryside are consuming. What can be done in order to ensure that people still living in the countryside can consume more if they don't have enough capital, and in modernized collective scale farming is not yet happening. On that?
I think the key to this question is medical insurance and social security, actually. Because we have seen that the rural farmers, they have improved the lifestyle compared to a decade ago. But now, the main problem for many households is that once any family member has a severe disease, they might go back to poverty or have severe decrease in income. So if there is a good medical insurance plan and a well-supported social security plan, then families could have more disposable income in other things. And I think that's the key.
I want to give the context is that they do have basic medical care insurance in the countryside for farmers, yeah. But you're saying it's not good enough. Yeah. They should raise the level of medical care.
Right.
Level.
Yes. I'm talking about a big disease coverage. There should be a higher portion or more equalized coverage between urban citizens and rural citizens. Now, urban residents enjoy much better benefits than rural ones, and that's one problem we need to tackle.
Earlier, at the top of the program, you mentioned technology and services for farmers. I want to pick up on that because compared with cultivating food grains, is more challenging to grow vegetables and raise livestock, such as cows, horses, and pigs. And that's probably many farmers are relying on because it gives them more profit. But it seems they don't have, they don't occupy the higher level of value chain because they don't have technology and services. But what needs to happen to make the change?
The main problem is that more than 80% of Chinese farms are still small-scale farms, yeah. And that's the reality we have to face. And when it's smallholders, it's very hard to use high-tech because every high-tech needs large-scale to be used, to be applied. And now China is going through this really rapid consolidation, but still it's mainly in certain industries, like in the pig industries, in the other like cattle breeding industries. But for most farmers, if they still plant crops, this is very difficult to achieve. But there can be some targeted technical assistance, including agricultural services, to help those farm to grow by providing modern management technologies, by training them, because now it's only the government that's taking up the rural trainings in agricultural skills. The social capitals or private companies are not even part of it. I think after this really fast period of online training in China for school kids, we should see a next wave of training for rural farmers and unnecessary skills in agriculture.
But that comes back to the question of land. Without large swaths of land in their hands, the farmers simply could not scale up their agricultural production, can they, on that?
It is very difficult. Sometimes it's because of topology, because in southern China, those land are in small pieces. For some places, it's impossible to consolidate. But in northern China, it is possible. Okay. It just needs a more coordinated policies between different villages, between different cities, or even provinces. So that is the problem of institution. We need to have a better coordinated policies between urban and rural and between different regions.
Isabel, we've been talking about Isabel Hilton is from China. She is the CEO of China Dialogue. Thank you, Isabel. We've been talking about how to further empower and enrich farmers in the countryside. A big problem is because of urbanization, many of them are moving to live in cities, so those left behind cannot have scale agriculture. What is your advice?
Well, it's certainly something you notice when you visit a Chinese village, that the people who are left behind are the older people and the children, and it's hard for them to be productive, and they earn very, very marginal incomes. I wouldn't begin to give advice to
And
China.
they also
but
created
in
some
the
social problems in the countryside for those old and young.
Well, it's yes, and it's bad for children to be separated from parents for so long, and obviously it's a period of very, very radical transition for the Chinese countryside. We went through something reasonably similar in as British society industrialized. We also had more people on the land than in the cities at the start of that process, just as China did. And just as China crossed that threshold to urbanization a few years back, so did our societies. But in order to maintain productivity, you obviously have to modernize and mechanize agriculture to compensate for the loss of labor. Agriculture changes in the process.
But is the Chinese government doing the right thing by providing technical assistance, financial support? Is that good enough, Isabel?
Well, I think both are essential. And I have to say this is a continuing discussion here. What is the right level of technical support? What is the right approach to farming? In the post-war period in the UK, when there was a big movement off the land still, essentially British agriculture modernized and industrialized. It became dependent on big machinery, big inputs of agrochemicals and so on. That enabled food production to increase with a much smaller labor input. But it also had very negative effects. It had negative environmental effects, for example. There's a loss of biodiversity. There's an overuse of chemicals. So it's very difficult to get this balance right. And the conversation is still very active about what kind of agriculture is sustainable, how do you balance food production with other ecosystem services, and how do you maintain a decent livelihood for farmers? Do you subsidize them? Do you pay them to grow crops? Do you pay them not to grow crops? This is still a very, very active discussion in Europe.
And Wang Dan, talking about productivity, there's always the debate whether China should keep the red line of 1.8 billion mu. That's 120 million hectares of land to guard against defarming. We need that much land to grow crops. But some people would argue we can always buy food from elsewhere. There's nothing to worry about. The productivity elsewhere is better. What is your take?
I think for certain crops, we certainly have to and can import more from abroad, for example, meat. Because when we talk about food security, we do not have a problem in staple food like rice and wheat, but we do have a problem maybe in providing enough feed and animals. But for domestic land supply, I think one important reason why it has to be kept at that large amount is because the average yield in Chinese farms are still pretty low. So the increase in production has to depend on the plantation area. And if we cannot resolve the technology problem, we have to keep that threshold of red line for a relatively long time.
But how can we solve the technology problem? That will be the fundamental thing, to increase the productivity of the Chinese agriculture so that we can use that land to produce more. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, I think this problem is similar to the chip problem, and we often call the seed technology as the chip in agriculture. It has to be the market that's eventually providing this kind of technology. We need to have a very supporting environment for schools and academia to do their research independently. And we need to have enough venture capitals in this kind of line of business. So the commercialization of such technologies will become easier. So the government needs to be there to help, but they cannot be interventing too much.
15 seconds, Isabel. Do you think technology and money will go to farming, China?
I think they're going to have to go to farming in China if China is to meet its ambitions in food security and food safety. Yes, it'll have to invest.
All right. Thank you very much, Isabel. Thank you, Wang Dan. You've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Joe in Beijing. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.